This program is brought to you by Dolco Media. Fixing South Sudan, ideas for the new nation. With award-winning journalist Mading Mor.
Absolutely.
Honorable Ashwin, as you can see, the ideas of the initiatives are varied.
On July 8th, the clashes in J1 took place, which was very unfortunate.
Including country-specific ones, which and the rebellion continue to be like young Machar.
Fixing South Sudan, ideas for the new nation.
Hello and welcome to Fixing South Sudan, your ideas for building the new nation. I am Adingor. This week, we look at the state of women empowerment in the Republic of South Sudan. What is Canada doing to support peace and development in the nation? What lessons can South Sudan draw from Canada's 150 years of statehood? And is women empowerment a good idea for fixing the nation? Joining us for the program is Excellency Alan Hamson, the Canadian Ambassador to the Republic of South Sudan. Sir, it's my pleasure to welcome you to Fixing South Sudan. How are you?
Thank you, Mading. I'm very well. Thank you for having
Welcome
me today.
to the show.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So we talk about women empowerment in South Sudan. What does it mean?
Well, I came up with this idea sort of as a response to your question about how we could fix South Sudan. Canada believes that the empowerment of women and girls as agents of change can be transformational in a society. I think we see that South Sudan is in a state of crisis, economic, security, and humanitarian crisis. And ensuring that women are able to fully realize their rights in their own lives can also bring change to their communities and their societies. So it's a very broad topic. We could explore many sub-aspects of it, but I think it's clear that in a society where women are not fully engaged in decision-making, in economic matters, even in security matters, the society will not be able to fully flourish and prosper. And so I'd like to suggest this is one of the ideas that could be brought forward to help improve the situation here.
You have been in South Sudan for about a year. What is the situation with regards to women?
Well, I think it's clear that this is a society in which we don't see as many women in positions of leadership in terms of the state, in terms of the organized forces, in terms of business and private sector. And yet, of course, women bear the greatest burden of the crisis. Mothers and girls fleeing from their homes due to insecurity, coping with economic hardships because of the deteriorating economy. And in many cases, while the men are fighting or away from their homes, the women have to support large families, and again, in very difficult economic conditions. As well, we're not even to talk about sexual and gender-based violence, which we know is such a scourge in South Sudan and unfortunately continues to rise in the context of insecurity here. So we know that women face a lot of hardships, average everyday women in the grassroots, and yet I think that there's a long way that they could go at all levels. In Juba, I've met many times with women's organizations who are really inspiring in terms of their commitment to finding a way out of crisis. They face challenges, of course. Building a women's movement is a challenge, and making sure that that all women's organizations can work together is an objective of theirs. But I think that some of the ideas they have for bringing the country forward are really interesting. And it would be really, I think, constructive if they were able to have more of a voice, more of a platform, and more of an opportunity to bring some of those ideas forward. Because, again, I think they bear a disproportionate burden at all levels.
When you talk about empowerment, it sounds like a plan. What form should that empowerment take?
Well, I think that as we see it, the important work that needs to be done is to both advance gender equality, to empower women and girls around the world, and to support the realization of their human rights and their well-being, including in economic matters. This is a very high-level topic. The specific programming aspects of women's empowerment can take many forms. Canada is committed to increasing our support to local women's organizations, for example, globally. We're working on a fund of about $150 million worldwide. That's not just for South Sudan,
Right.
but worldwide, which would be rolled out over 5 years to support local women's organizations at the grassroots, because we believe that these are powerful agents of change. We also support, of course, the work of a wide range of development and humanitarian partners who include gender as a mainstreamed objective of their work. I can point to a lot of Canada's work as a committed development partner here in the health sector. We are one of the leading donors in contributing to meeting the basic needs in health, promoting basic health services with a particular focus on women and girls' sexual and reproductive health and rights. This has included lots of activities working with the leadership of the Ministry of Health and working through the World Health Organization and the United Nations Population Fund to build, for example, to build maternal complexes throughout South Sudan. We built 6, including in small places like Kwajok, where world-class comprehensive emergency obstetric care is available for women so that they don't need to die in childbirth. Yeah. Because if a mother dies in childbirth, the whole family suffers for generations. And it's completely avoidable. I shouldn't say that. I'm not a medical professional, but of course with trained midwives and appropriate facilities, you can drastically reduce maternal mortality and save many lives, including the lives of the newborn children. So we're doing that with WHO by building maternal complexes. We're doing that with the Population Fund of the United Nations through training of nurses and midwives so they can be deployed around the country to attend to the specific health needs of women and girls. And as I said, address one of these really serious impediments to women's empowerment, which is death in childbirth and other types of reproductive health problems. It's not something we talk about on the news very often, but fistula is a very serious health problem that affects a lot of women in South Sudan as a result of so-called early marriage. And it can be with them the rest of their lives and really stands in the way of the full realization of their rights. So we believe by providing this kind of health care to women, it can help them realize their rights, live full and productive lives, and contribute to their communities.
Women need basic services, but what are the issues that they are raising? Issues about how they should contribute meaningfully to this idea of fixing South Sudan.
Well, I think we need more than, unfortunately, the length of this program to get into all the issues, because when I have sat down with women's organizations on several occasions, including during the visit of our minister, the Minister of International Development and of La Francophonie of Canada, Marie-Claude Bibeau. She visited South Sudan in June, and we had a very interesting, I think, 2.5-hour discussion with women's organizations. That followed an earlier 3.5-hour discussion I had with the same organizations, and I mean, we couldn't keep up our note-taking with their ideas. So I think the question is not what needs to be done, but how we pass the microphone to the women's organizations themselves to tell you the answer to the question. But I could summarize that in brief. I think there are a range of questions about the organization of the women's movement and how to make sure that women's organizations can work together, can connect the Juba-based organizations with the grassroots in the Beled, how the more experienced elder women can mentor and bring up the young girls and young women into positions of leadership. Of course, issues of economic sustainability. This is true for so many valuable organizations in South Sudan, and that the economic crisis is really standing in the way of advancing rights, advancing empowerment. If activists, leaders, organizers are spending most of their time trying to put food on the table for their own families. So we know that the basic economic sustainability of women's organizations is a challenge as well. One reason why we're rolling out this fund worldwide to try to provide that kind of base support as necessary. We know there are huge challenges of insecurity on a wide range of levels. I mean, women in rural areas I think are desperate for an end to the conflict and for comprehensive and durable security in the rural areas.
Yeah.
So not only the conflict, but also an end to this banditry, unknown gunmen, and criminal activity, so that they don't have to fear leaving their homes to collect water or firewood in the rural villages. And so I'm sure that going village to village, this would be one of the top priorities, is the physical security of women.
Women need peace and they need development.
Of course, economic development, many best practices around the world suggest that if you involve women in the economy more, they're a catalyst for development. We've seen that, and Canada is supporting a range of programs. The day before yesterday, my colleague from the embassy was at the, I don't remember the name, but at a agro-processing facility supported by Canada through UNIDO, which is supporting women entrepreneurs processing the raw materials from their farms into agricultural products that they can sell in the supermarket. So creating these economic opportunities for women, because the resources that are generated, they go right back into the family. They go right back into the health and education of the children, which brings up the society. So these are, I think, important things. One aspect we didn't talk about also is not just what women want to get out of any change in society, but how women can transform society. I think in particular about what's happening in Addis this week, which we might talk about later in the program, but Canada has been very active in working with our partners to push for the meaningful engagement of women.
Let's talk about it now. So there is the high-level revitalization forum.
Yes.
And it's designed to do what? And then what is in it for women?
Sure. Well, the Revitalization Forum is, of course, I'm sure you and your viewers know, is a regionally led initiative to try to revitalize the August 2015 agreement and to try to end the conflict here, bringing the parties back to the table and in a new dispensation to allow for the implementation of the agreement in 2015. The specific aspect that is of interest to me here is ensuring that women are at the forefront of these discussions. I want to talk about a 2015 or 16 called Global Study by UN Women, which was this very large, very comprehensive analysis of research that had been done on women's engagement in 40 peace negotiations since the Second World War, complemented by statistical analysis of 181 peace agreements from 1989 to 2011. And this research clearly showed that when women are meaningfully engaged in peace negotiations, there's a much higher probability of reaching an agreement, and there's a much higher probability of the agreement being implemented. And when women are engaged as mediators, witnesses, signatories, or negotiators, there's a 20% greater chance that the agreement will last more than 2 years. And I think the reasons for this are clear to all of our South Sudanese. If you've been misbehaving and your grandmother catches you, I think she's going to know how to put you back into line and make sure you do the right thing. So I think we need some of that energy of the women who've been carrying the burden of this conflict and suffering the most to be at the table and to push all of the parties to do what's right to end the suffering of the people of South Sudan.
Is that happening in Addis this time around?
So I don't have the latest information because I'm here in Juba, and in Addis there's, I think, a strong intent to keep the discussions in camera, as they say, so that there can be confidence built. But I understand that there were some of the significant women's representatives from Juba were invited, in addition to the actual signatories of the 2015 agreement. So that's positive. I was in Addis myself 2 weeks ago discussing this issue with IGAD, and they made a commitment that they would be inviting more than just the signatories, so more than only one women's representative. They would invite a range of women's representatives, and I think that's very positive. I have not seen the detailed kind of readout from the discussions about how they're being engaged and if they're being given opportunities to raise their voices. I certainly hope so, and again, having discussed this with IGAD, I think
when we talk about women participation, in this case, the Revitalization Forum, how do they come in? Because there are so many groupings. Are
Yes.
they their own entity or are they part of those groupings?
You mean the groupings like the political factions and so on?
Yeah, and the opposition, the government.
No, I hear that. Well, I think that I wasn't here in 2015, but one of the criticisms that I've heard from a variety of sources about the negotiations that led to the August 2015 agreement was that there was a certain politicization of the representation of the for example, civil society and women's representatives and so on, with each party seeking to ensure that their people were there in those seats. So, of course, one of the most important priorities is that any women's representatives at the table are somehow non-aligned, are somehow independent voices who speak on behalf of the women of South Sudan and not on behalf of any politician. So, it's not for me to say who those women are, but I hope that IGAD will reach out and has reached out to the right parties, the right expert organizations who can help identify who those women are, who are truly non-aligned. I also understand from IGAD that there was an intent to invite, as part of each faction, at least one woman of 3 representatives. So 1/3 of the actual political negotiators from the different parties should be a woman, 1/3 of them. That's excellent. I mean, that's also constructive in ensuring a diversity of voices, but I don't think that replaces the need to have independent women's voices at the table who speak on behalf of the non-aligned women of South Sudan who are suffering in the conflict.
Let's take a break from it.
Great.
Welcome to Dolco Media Services. We have so many services for you, such as video production, camera hiring, sound system hiring, event management, passport photo, stand-up comedy, printing, drama, music, dance, multimedia, and photography. Dolco Media Services, our culture, our pride.
Welcome back to Fixing South Sudan, your ideas for building the new nation. I am Adingor, and with us is His Excellency Alan Hamson, the Canadian Ambassador to the Republic of South Sudan. Women empowerment as an idea for fixing South Sudan. We'll explore it from the broader perspective of what Canada is doing in South Sudan. You are the 4th largest humanitarian donor in the country, and you started talking about some of the projects that you are implementing in the country. Give us the full picture of what Canada is doing in South Sudan.
Thanks, Mading. Well, Canada's a committed development and humanitarian partner here. We've been a significant donor in South Sudan since well before independence, and we are working to help reduce poverty, to empower women and girls, and to meet the humanitarian needs of the people of South Sudan. I think South Sudan is one of our largest recipients of assistance around the world. It's very important to us, and I think this was shown by the visit in June of the Honorable Marie-Claude Bibeau, who's our Minister of International Development and of La Francophonie. Our assistance in development is focused on meeting the basic needs of the poorest and most vulnerable, especially women and girls. This is done, for example, through promoting basic health services we discussed moments ago, including a focus on sexual reproductive health and rights. We're one of the big contributors to the Health Pool Fund, which is a multi-donor trust fund which is supporting the delivery of health services all around the country. Every clinic, every hospital, more or less, is supported by the Health Pool Fund, so it can continue to operate even in the context of the economic crisis where government resources are unfortunately not being devoted to this, such as they are. We're also working to fight hunger and build the conditions for sustainable long-term development in the agricultural sector. So Canada is a major donor to a wide range of projects which are supporting farmers, providing seeds, providing tools and training, including fisheries. This is a challenge to do in a context of insecurity and displacement because, of course, when people are displaced, the seeds, the plants, they have to leave them behind, even the tools. But we have continued to work through a range of partners to provide this type of food security work in the areas where we can, in the areas where there's less displacement. And we are encouraging our partners, and indeed we hosted a workshop not long ago where we brainstorm with other donors and with our partners about how you do food security work in this type of an unstable context so that you can be working to enhance the resilience of people in terms of meeting their own food needs. I think this food aspect is important because we're not talking about handouts. We're talking about supporting the capacity of farmers to produce their own food and even produce surpluses which could be sold in the market or provided to others in their extended networks. And this, of course, is the future of development in South Sudan, is going to be agriculture. But to get there, we need to build persistent and durable security everywhere in the country. While we are a major donor in development assistance, I think that's an important thing. You mentioned humanitarian assistance in your intro, but these aspects of supporting the health sector, even building infrastructure in the health sector, building maternal complexes. I mean, this is firm infrastructure that our medical partners will continue to operate for many years and keep in good condition, working with the provincial, or I should say the state governments. And then investments in agriculture. This is development work. And we'd like to do more of that. But with the situation the way it is, we're also, of course, devoting a lot of our resources to humanitarian assistance.
Do you feel that the projects that you are implementing in the country are making an impact? Are they having an impact?
Of course they are, yeah, clearly. I think some of our work in maternal health, for example, has reduced the maternal mortality rate since 2011 from over 2,000 deaths per 100,000 births, which is atrocious, a real tragedy, to under 800. So that's almost a 2/3 decrease in mortality, which is a lot of lives saved of women and children. So there are a number of metrics like this showing how our work has had an impact, in particular in the health sector. I think that with the upsurge in violence and insecurity since 2013, there's no question there have been setbacks. When you're trying to do development work in the context of conflict, it is sometimes frustrating and certainly dangerous for those doing the work. And so for that reason, we've consistently called for improved safety, security, and access for aid workers around the country from all parties, from the government and from other forces who are in the bush. But I think we've seen impacts. But I wanted to say as well, we can't forget the work of Canada in humanitarian assistance, that we're one of the largest donors, also supporting the work of humanitarian agencies who are trying to save lives, alleviate suffering, and uphold human dignity while the conflict rages. And these are the large UN partners, the Red Cross movement, and so on. What
do you make about this assistance that is being given to South Sudan? And there is a lot of criticism about aid increases dependence. So do you think it will continue to be aid, or will it be trade?
Well, I certainly see that there's a lot of private sector potential in South Sudan that could be unleashed if there was persistent security. I think first and foremost in the agricultural sector, and I wish that those parties who are promoting conflict would instead see themselves as agricultural barons one day with, like we see in other parts of Africa, with huge productive farms that could feed all of Africa. So I certainly hope we see that in the future, because of course in the past, South Sudan was able to feed many of its neighbors, producing huge agricultural surpluses, and this could be private sector. This could be something that generates revenue for average people across the country, including in cattle keeping, not only in farming, but also in cattle keeping. We also can clearly see that South Sudan's oil wealth could be more developed, if there was security. Right now the production is very low compared to where it has been in the past. And in addition, I'd point to minerals. I mean, there's obviously a lot of potential for mining in the country. That's a long-term endeavor.
Why don't we talk about the specifics? Is Canada going to be interested in investing in South Sudan at some point?
Our approach right now is we're not actively promoting trade or investment in South Sudan because of the security situation. We're concerned for the safety of Canadian business people who might be working here. We certainly support them when they come, but it's been very, very slow. There has been very little uptake so far from Canadian business people and investors. I think simply because the situation remains so uncertain. And this is one of the messages that I am sharing also at all times with with the parties who are in Addis negotiating is that no one's economic interest is being advanced through this conflict and insecurity. I know that for there to be meaningful investments by Canada, or more likely by other regional countries and Asian countries, they're going to need to see some more security in Juba and outside of Juba before they're willing to really dive in deep.
The strangest thing is that at the height of the Civil War, the Canadian oil company, Talisman, was operating in the Sudan, and there was a conflict. So is it that bad right now?
Well, I don't want to speak about that time, which is well before I began working on these issues. But I think you see sometimes in the petroleum sector, there are foreign investors working in the petroleum sector right now, no Canadians, but there are other companies from other regions who are working now in some of the oil fields. And that's because, in the specific areas they're working, they're able to maintain a minimum level of operational security. But I don't think that's what anyone in South Sudan is hoping for, is the minimum amount of economic activity in the tiny pockets of security. We really want to unleash the human potential of South Sudan, the creativity of the youth you meet in Juba, the agricultural potential of the rich lands. And to do that, you can't just have little pockets of security. You need to really end the conflict, address banditry and criminality, and I should be able to take a boda to Tambura and to Torit and to Malakal, or at least, but right now, of course, that would be foolish, and that goes to show some of the limits on the potential for economic growth here. No one's interested in aid dependency, and as part of the Sustainable Development Goals, all of the donors like Canada who are trying to advance development in South Sudan, we plan our projects in such a way that they'll be sustainable. It is a challenge in this context because of the uncertainty, but that's our goal, right? Our goal is to help South Sudanese stand on their 2 feet, take their destiny in their hands, and build something beautiful in South Sudan.
You're saying that when there is real peace, investment will come, including from Canada.
I think when there's real peace, we will be able to, all the donors will be able to engage much more fully in development assistance, which is the first step. Okay, I don't think you're likely to see huge private sector investment right after there's peace. There needs to be some foundations built through sustainable development work, which can build the foundations for the growth of the economy, and ultimately, I think, for investments by the private sector, including the South Sudanese private sector, regional countries, overseas countries, and hopefully grow the economy and benefit the livelihoods of everyone in South Sudan. But this is going to be a long process.
Right.
Yeah.
This month, Canada celebrated 150 years of Confederation. You have been a state for 150 years. There have certainly been challenges, but there is vast development in Canada. What can South Sudan learn from Canada? Or when you think about Canada and South Sudan, you do the comparisons. What are the parallels? Are there any similarities?
I think, Mading, one of the issues that always comes to mind for me is the diversity in Canada and our embrace of diversity and inclusion. Canada is a very diverse country. We have people on our streets from every country of the world. In Toronto, our biggest city, more than 51% of residents were born outside of Canada. It's more than half of the population of our biggest city are first-generation immigrants or permanent residents, and so on. So, the face of Canada is changing, and we are accommodating that through a multiculturalism policy that recognizes there's not one Canadian culture, there are many cultures or cultural traditions. We have official bilingualism, 2 languages given equal weight. And I think respect for diversity as something that gives strength to our country, that gives richness to our lives. But this was not always the case. Of course, in Canada, we have had moments of great difficulty. The country was born from a very difficult relationship with our Indigenous peoples, a situation that we're continuing to that our government has apologized for and has sought to repair some of the damage many years later. It was born from conflict between the English and French nations on the battlefield in 1763. It was born from rebellions and repression of those rebellions in the 1800s. So we we've had many difficult moments, moments of conflict and strife in our country. But I think over the decades of the 20th century, we tried to find a way to learn to work together, to accommodate each other, and to recognize that there could be no solution by force to end some of these contradictions in our society. We're diverse. We had, at a minimum, we had English, French, and Indigenous people. But we couldn't impose one of those three groups' identity on the others. And I think one of the lessons from the relationship with Indigenous peoples was how dangerous that is and how much harm it can cause. And we've apologized for that. So I think that the efforts that have been made in Canada to overcome differences by us recognizing and valuing them is one of the ideas I want to bring to South Sudan, which is this is also a diverse country. It has many languages, ethnic groups, but also ways of thinking and opinions. And we hope that as the revitalization process moves forward, the parties will somehow learn to reach an agreement through negotiation and compromise, not seeking an absolute victory, but recognizing that everyone will be better off if they compromise and find a middle-of-the-road solution that will end the suffering of the people. This is something that I think brought Canada from a country of great contradictions and challenges to a country today that is admired for our way of life, for the relative harmony of our society, and the respect for diversity and the inclusion of everyone. And this is something I'd love to see in South Sudan in the future, if the leaders can find a way to work together.
If South Sudan becomes an inclusive society, it may emulate the Canadian success.
I certainly hope so. I think that would be a bright future for all South Sudanese.
And coming back to women empowerment as an idea for fixing South Sudan, is it what is going to change South Sudan if it is well done?
I think that absolutely, if women and girls can be more empowered in realizing their human rights, they can be transformational agents of society. I should say it's not only a task for women, though. We recognize that women and men must both be equally committed to changing attitudes, behaviors, and practices to ensure that women and girls are empowered. So we want to engage also with men and boys as both agents of change and beneficiaries of change, because we think they have a lot to gain as well from the empowerment of women as equal partners, equal citizens, equal stakeholders in society.
But women can propel this nation ahead.
I think that's clear. My Prime Minister named a Council of Ministers, a cabinet that was 50% women. And I think we've seen the creativity and energy and expertise that the women ministers have brought to the table. They're really, both of the ministers I report to, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of International Development, are women, and extremely strong advocates in their respective mandates. So I think these are ideas that if South Sudan gave them a try, we might see some progress in meeting the needs of the people.
What do you think about fixing South Sudan? Can South Sudan be fixed?
Well, of course, it's not for foreign envoys to declare South Sudan in need of fixing. But as you asked the question, we're happy to engage with our ideas and share them. I think that there's no question that South Sudan is in crisis and that the people have suffered far too long. People, what do you say? Nasta Janub Sudan Tabanin Musukida. And that it's time for there to be a change so that the suffering can end and the people can enjoy the fruits of stability and growth and development that are rightfully theirs. But how we get there, my humble idea for your listeners today is women's empowerment. It could be a catalyst for transformation of society, and hopefully that can contribute to the discussion.
Ambassador Allen, thanks for coming on Fixing South Sudan.
Thank you so much.
And that is Fixing South Sudan, your ideas for building the new nation. With me, Madengor. What is your idea for fixing the nation? Join me on a one-on-one debate. Let's debate about our